Here's how to create accessible documents using Word and also turn them into fillable forms. When you start Word, it might look something like this. This would be a fairly typical view. And for a lot of people, you won't have any customizations in the nav bar, the ribbon. And so we've created an accessibility tab that allows you to add some handy accessibility features in Word to the tab, to the ribbon. And so what you would do is you would go to Word Options, so File, Options, click on Customize Ribbon, and then import a file, a customization file, and exported UI. This is called Word Accessibility Customizations. Say yes, you want to replace your tabs, and then click OK. So now I have an accessibility tab that gives me access to the tools that you can use to configure your environment to make it easy to create accessible documents. So the first thing you'll want to do is open up the navigation pane, then open up the style pane, and thirdly, the check accessibility tool. So now I'm going to show you how we create basic structure in a document. So let's assume this is going to be a proposal form. And I'm going to grab some dummy text known as lorem ipsum text, so that I have some text to work with here. And the first thing I'm going to do, having typed out a heading for the page, is tag this as a heading level 1. When I tag things, it does apply a style to it, does apply a format, but that's not the important thing here. The important thing is that it applies a heading level 1 tag to the document, to the text. While I'm here, since this is my heading level 1, I'm also going to configure the title of the document, which is a separate field that you can see over here in Properties when you go to the Info screen. So you can also, so I'm going to type in the same content as the H1. You can also add additional information here. And that will be the text that shows up in search results if this ends up becoming a PDF or a Word document that is publicly available on the web and then gets indexed by Google. If you don't fill this in, sometimes it can have very undesirable results. Sometimes it's a file path, a file name. Worst case scenario is that it's the name of a previous document, so it's completely incorrect. It's always good to set this, and this will often be the first thing that people see for your document. So the next thing you want to do is think about subheadings for the page. There are occasional examples where subheadings aren't required. So for example, if you're working on a formal letter, unless it has a subject field, which you could turn into an H1, heading 1, then there might not be any subheads. Although, if letters have sections, then they may have subheads, in which case it would be good to add them. But for most documents, subheads are actually a requirement to make them accessible because it is a way to navigate the document using a screen reader. And if you are creating a form, there's a good chance that you'll have sets of fields that need to be filled out. And so what you want to do is break up the form to describe the different fields that are available, the different sets of fields that are available, give people the ability to navigate around the form. So you might end up having some text at the top that describes the purpose of the form. And then typically you'll ask the user to provide some basic information. And we would mark that up as a heading level 2. At this point, there's probably going to be a series of fields, and maybe even some additional text, such as let us know who you are, and then something like a first name. What I want to point out before I go too much further here is that as I mark up headings on the page, so let's say, for instance, that lower down we are going to add a section on your proposal. As I add headings to the page, my headings menu in the navigation pane starts to build a tree of the document. And as the document grows, I gain the ability to navigate the document using the headings tree in the navigation pane. This mimics what a user can do using a screen reader that is reading the content of the page to them. So it's important to get the headings right and to make them intuitive in terms of the sections that they describe. So you might want to, in terms of gathering information, you might want to take a full name. Maybe it's the person's first name. So let's assume that we'll do here, just for the sake of demonstration, a first name, a last name, and an email address. One other thing I'll note here is that the default style for Word for me right now is including additional spacing after each paragraph, and this is a good thing. What it means is that I don't have to use a paragraph character simply to generate space, because if you end up converting this to a PDF, that empty paragraph gets turned into content that you then have to remove or tag as an artifact if you're when you're doing the remediation of the PDF. And the goal here is to avoid having to do remediation entirely. So what you want to do is set your paragraphs to automatically contain space after them. I like 12 points, generally speaking. So here I'm adjusting the style globally so that all of my paragraphs end up with a 12-point margin at the bottom. And this means that each time I add a new one, I'm automatically getting the space between them. I don't need to add yet another paragraph simply to generate that vertical distance. And you'll notice over here in the accessibility viewer that I start to get warnings when I add too much white space. Okay, so how to add a field to your form. The thing to note here is that there's a difference between editing, obviously, creating the form, and then testing it as a user would. And a thing you will want to do is restrict editing, use the restrict editing feature to test the form. So I will demonstrate that momentarily, but for now, let's add some fields. So you click on the Legacy Tools drop down, and this very first icon here, it's an icon that shows A, B, and an insertion point inside of a box. That is adding a text form field. I'm going to repeat that process for each of these. These fields will expand to be as wide as the content they contain. So although they look small, they will in fact expand to accommodate their content. Now, I have fields on the document now, but a screen reader would not know anything about these fields, and screen readers need to be able to voice fields in forms to the user so that they know what kind of input to provide. And so the next button up here is called Properties, and this allows you to set specific information on each field. Each of these fields is going to be of type regular text, so I don't need to change that. I'm also not going to put any limitations on the field or require any kind of special formatting. But what I am going to do is give it a name. And what I like to do for field naming in Word is something called camel case, where you capitalize the first letter of each word, but otherwise omit spaces between the words. Spaces can cause problems, so it's certainly better to have to eliminate them from your names. But this allows you to easily read the different words that comprise the name. The second thing you need to do is add help text. And this is going to appear both in the status bar in Word, and I'll show you that in a moment so that you can test that your labels are appearing, but it's also what is going to be voiced to a screen reader user who has put the focus, which is to say the point at which the screen reader will read what is on the screen. It puts the focus, when the user puts the focus on the field, this is what will be read out to them. This might seem very obvious and possibly unnecessary, but it will make more sense in the context of navigating around the form as you build up a series of labels. The importance of a field like a label like this, for instance, would be especially true if you are asking for other names on the form. So specifying that this is your name, the name of the person filling out the form, will make sense in context. So what you want to do is on the status bar, select type your own and type in the label. And then for the help key, just repeat that. And now click OK. So now this field has both a name and it has a label. And I just realized that I split these up into first and last names, so I can go back in and change this to say your first name. So then I'll do a similar thing on the second field. So this would be last name. And then this would be email. Here's a case where you can get a little bit more specific in a way that could be useful to the user, especially if they have a personal email address and a college email address. Okay, so now that you've provided names for the fields and labels, you now have the ability to test the form as a user would. So what we're going to do here, so note that my cursor is currently on the word first, in the middle of the word first. What I'm going to do is use the restrict editing option. Now the first time you use this in the document, you have to set it up to tell it what in fact you are restricting. And so what you need to do here is use option 2, editing restrictions, check the box, and then say that this is for filling in forms. So basically you're saying only allow the type of editing that I select in this drop down below. And in this case, I'm saying filling in forms. So I'm restricting the document to the filling in of the forms that it contains. And then I'm going to say, yes, start enforcing protection. And I don't need a password, so I'm just going to click OK. What I want to demonstrate is that when I'm in editing mode and protection is not running, I can go wherever I want in the document. The moment I start enforcing the protection, the focus moves from inside the word first to the first available field, because that's the first thing that the user is allowed to do in this document. And you'll notice down in the status bar here that it says your first name. If I then use the tab key to move to the next field, it changes the label to show the label for that field. And again for email. And then if I shift tab to reverse direction, it shows the labels for the previous two fields. What a screen reader would do in this context is not only read the label for the field, but it would also read the type of input that the field can take. So for instance, text. If that wasn't the case, it might say something like, that you have to choose a field, like a forced choice between a yes or a no. It might indicate that there are checkboxes. And if the field contains data, it will also read out the data that the field currently contains, so that the user can edit it if they need to, or if they misspell their name, or whatever content they put in. I'm going to erase those examples and then stop protection so that I can keep editing the form. But this is the basic approach. I'll get a little bit of screen real estate back here if I close the restrict editing pane again. And then perhaps I need to go on to the next section, and let's add a few additional subheadings that would complete the structure of the document, and then I'll add a few additional fields. So in this case, we've got your proposal, and I'll add some fields for that in a moment. Then possibly there's an authorizations area where you need to gather approvals, for example. And then possibly there's an area for, just going to add some help text there, assuming that's what that is. And then possibly there's even a section called office use only. Mark that up as a heading 2. Same for this one. If you had an instructions area, you could add that at the top. Possibly you want to indicate to whom the completed form should be sent and provide an email address. But in any case, I wanted to show you what it looks like when you have a full structure for your subheadings. Then let's go back to your proposal, and here we're going to add a few additional fields. So let's say you want to provide an area that people can type in a larger amount of text. And you also anticipate that they're going to want to fill this form out. In some cases, they may want to print this form out and fill it in by hand. One of our accessibility obligations is to make sure that it can be filled in with a keyboard, but it doesn't have to be. And so you want to be able to style your form so that it could be filled in by hand. So let's assume that the only item we need, the only field we need in this section is a large text area. Trying to make this as sensible as possible. So in this case, I'm not going to put the field immediately after the label. I'm actually going to create a new line and allow the field to go on the new line. I'm going to insert my field here. Call it project description. provide a paragraph that describes your project. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the margin to select the entire paragraph. So if I was to go back to the Home tab and turn on all characters, that's the difference between selecting just the field and selecting the paragraph character as well. I'll go back to my Accessibility tab. I've got my entire paragraph selected. Then I have this hover that pops up. I'm going to select Style and create a style. And I'm going to call this style Text Area. And now I want to modify it. To add 72 points. We'll see if that's a good amount. Add the style to the gallery, automatically update, yes, and click OK. Now I have a style in my styles pane called Text Area that I can apply to a field that contains text that should be allowed to grow to a certain amount. In other words, a paragraph worth of text. But that would automatically create this amount of space if the document was printed without actually adding characters that would generate errors. So we're not going to hit return multiple times to generate vertical space. We've simply created a style called Text Area that automatically adds 72 points of spacing after the paragraph instead of the normal 12. Now if I go back to the Accessibility tab and choose Restrict Editing and turn on Enforcing Protection, I have 4 fields that I can navigate between. Your first name, last name, your college email, and provide a paragraph that describes your project. So what we're starting to do here is we're starting to build up a fully navigable form that is going to work whether the user is filling it out using their keyboard simply because it's convenient for them to do so, filling it out using their keyboard possibly because you asked them to in the instructions, or maybe the majority of your users are printing this out and filling it in by hand, but you have an unsighted user who is using a screen reader and they will be able to fill it in using the keyboard. And thus we've met our obligations by ensuring that not being able to see the document visually doesn't prevent the user from filling it out. Hope this is helpful.